each of you obviously have attempted to fundraise outside of Arcview too. What's the level of investor education like? How much do you need to justify the market potential? How much do you need to talk about countries and states that have legalized that sort of thing? Evan, why don't we start with you?
It's gotten better, but it's certainly still a heavier lift than most other industries.
John?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Evan on a lot of that. I think what we're seeing now is a more educated investor for those who have been in the space for a while. People that are looking for either targeted formulations, branding, vertical integration. Frankly, for us, it was easier to raise capital before we even had a permit than after we received permits, both in hemp and marijuana. So to that point, the investor community seems more knowledgeable and more educated, I think, than it has been, which is actually refreshing.
That's good. Jordan?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The investment world has evolved a lot, really, even just over the last year. And I kind of class investors into three categories, the first of which is the most waning today, which is the guy that just knows nothing. They're few and far between these days. Everybody has an understanding. So the last two groups are the ones that know a lot and see the world completely differently than you do, and the ones that see it exactly as you do, and those are the rarer ones. And that's actually, it cuts down a lot of the education time, because once you know that you don't align in the way that you view the industry at large, you know that there's not a partnership there. So it's much more helpful, whether you're up and down Bay Street in Toronto or making the rounds in Manhattan. People are getting to deals or not much quicker than they were before, it would seem.
Makes sense. Matt?
Yeah, kind of second all this. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, a few years ago, there was a lot of excitement and just a lot of noise in the space, and just the word cannabis alone had, investors all starry-eyed. And I think now, you're seeing a lot of more sophisticated people. The stigma is being smashed. You have top quality entrepreneurs now, leaving their jobs at Google or Facebook, getting into the space. And, investors are getting much more sophisticated as well. I've seen some people, ex-Twitch founders and such around here. And, these people are used to looking at real fundamentals and real data. And you can't just get by saying, you're the largest or the biggest or the most engaged without being able to back it up. And so, I think it's good overall for the industry, though. I think it's good that we're relying more on fundamentals and real data versus just hype. And we're looking forward to the next wave of entrepreneurs that I think are much more sophisticated, and I think that's much better for investors as well.
Excellent. No, I mean, I think one of the political issues that Americans can all agree on is that legalizing cannabis in some shape or form is something that resonates with Americans. So it's good to see that reflected in your own conversations too. Next question is a more pointed question for Evan, and also I'll follow with you, Matt, too, because each of you brings a unique perspective. Evan, I believe you're the only one here who has experience in deploying capital, especially with your time at Casa Verde as well as other private equity funds. And so, we just talked about that first conversation, how to open up the conversation with an investor and how that first pitch goes, so to speak. Now let's get past that. Your passive due diligence is about time to sign on the dotted line. What has been the deal breakers for you? Is it the crazy high valuations, recent swings in the market, the looming cloud of federal illegality here in the States? What has been that deal breaker in your experience?
All the above. I mean, you kind of listed out some of the key ones. Raising capital on behalf of another company versus deploying it is very different. So when we raise and advise companies on how to raise, how to structure, valuation is certainly a key factor in that, and given the swings in the market dynamics up in Canada has not helped some U.S. operators, but in other cases has helped them tremendously, because you have strong fundamentals here in the U.S. with operators in key markets, so that makes that a little bit easier. You still have the regulatory risk, you still have, given that, some arbitrage opportunities. But those are all the key factors that investors are still wary of. 280E from a tax standpoint for many others is a key risk factor that scares some people off when you see some potentially high tax liabilities that have not been disclosed. Same thing with the ability to transfer licenses or have other financial interested parties on licenses as well. So there are a few key things that scare investors away, but ultimately you're looking at the risk reward profile and where this fits in their perspective. So, it's a much more open dialogue now. People know what to look for. People come into those conversations a little bit easier. So, companies have to be very well equipped to speak about their fundamentals, where 3 years ago, people didn't even understand what a P&L was or what their cash flow forecasts were. And that's changed significantly. So you get over those hurdles a little bit quicker now, but the ones that you mentioned are still key factors.
Makes sense, makes sense. And don't worry, John and Jordan, I'll put you on the spot too, but you'll have to wait your turn. Next question is for you, Matt, though. You presented earlier today, and you also bring a unique perspective in that you have people from outside of the cannabis space who are already involved with you. You mentioned Joe Montana's fund, the folks from Shopify, that sort of thing. And we just talked about fundamentals and how we look at startups and early stage companies, private early stage companies. We borrow and have learned a lot from the Silicon Valley space in particular. So I want to ask you about that. When you have the conversations with Joe Montana's fund versus the Shopify folks and other Silicon Valley folks versus the conversations that you may have had already today here with cannabis investors, do they look for anything different? Are those conversations any different? And if so, by how much or none at all?
I think there's a lot of similarities and some kind of key differences. I think that many of these people are very sophisticated, and I think one aspect of any investment is the relationship. I've noticed a lot over the past kind of few years being in this that, the intros that you get to an investor and who's kind of making that intro obviously matters a lot. There's certain people that will be referring people to funds like Liquid 2 Ventures with Joe Montana or, Lair Hippo in New York. And if that intro is strong, if it's someone that they really trust, you're going to be in a lot better standing just optically. And so I think that rings true in cannabis as well, but it's especially true with these more established investors because they just have referral networks that, you come through Greg or Mike or whoever it may be, it's probably a solid investment. And so I think the relationship aspect kind of rings truer than ever with those people. And also, just making sure that in general you just have, a good reputation in general, which is incredibly important. They're going to go and ask around to everyone does this person check out, what was their past venture? Is that real? And, you need to make sure that you're kind of managing that and always doing right by people because you never know, who's going to ask.
Exactly. I mean, that's why we put Arcview together over the last 9 years. It's the reason why it's 3 days long, people, so you can meet each other and everything. The power of the network. So we just talked about trends in the investing side of things, the fundraising side of things. Let's talk about market trends now. And so one of the things I want to talk about, and this is open to everyone to start things off, is just validating some of the research that we hear from market researchers, starting with target markets, the consumer base. Market researchers commonly tout that there's this new wave of cannabis consumer. It's the baby boomers, the millennials, the Gen X professionals, that sort of thing. We're all coming and making up this new wave of cannabis consumer. Now, and I see it all the time with companies that I work with who are trying to pitch and are saying these are the folks that we need to go after. This is where the growth is. And so I understand that each of you only has a perspective of a slice of the cannabis universe. But based on that slice, to what extent are you able to validate what the market research is saying? Is there a growing trend among these communities? Do you even have that insight at all? And would it be useful to you? Why don't we start with Matt and then work our way down? Okay, all right.
I would say yes, that the trends that are being reported are for the most part correct. The other thing that gets often overlooked is the new user that's coming of age for the first time. And what's not being acknowledged is that their pathway in is drastically different than the generation before them. Like my generation, when we first became consumers, the utensils that are available to them, the storefront, the brick and mortar, or the delivery, and how they receive the product is different. The marketing is different. So yes, the baby boomers, the soccer moms, that is a rapidly growing segment to the industry too, but what's almost being underserved is those like fresh 21s. And so that's one of the ones that we always try to be, in our business, conscious of attacking as well, because those are, you got a longer lifespan on a customer that's 21 than one that's 61. So.
Right, makes sense. John?
Yeah, I would say it's it's definitely true, especially in terms of the form that people are using. Even nowadays with pets, they certainly don't smoke. So, but truthfully, across the board, we have different segmentation where people prefer vape, people prefer flower, people prefer vaping flower. It just really depends on a lot of it is their generation and how they were introduced.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, it's really about what segment you're really trying to figure out. Adult use, the kind of health and wellness side, and then the pharmaceutical side, and each one of those will have different demographics, different trends. Hard to really break that down in a short session, but the reality is really everyone is a consumer when you think about what we're talking about. It's a functional ingredient to some consumable in whatever form factor that is, and it's for a very specific purpose. And that specific purpose may be very universal right now and very driven by averages, but it will become more personalized as we do more research. So the trends as we're seeing them now is just a function of exploration. And what I tend to look at, what I tend to advise clients and other investors to look at are not trends in the cannabis space, but trends in general industries. If you're going to look at food and beverage, look at food and beverage trends. Go down to Expo West in a couple of weeks and see what's happening there. That is the trend of where cannabis consumables will be going. Not necessarily can we come up with some unique flavor profile that's never been thought of before. These aren't unique things. We're not all kind of creating anything from scratch. There's a lot of movement that we're seeing in each of those different verticals. And so I think depending on whether it's media or product or something else, those trends are really bearing out in terms of how we're approaching those segments, and that's from a new consumer, maybe medically, depending on their age, or adult use, 21 and up. And I don't think that is really going to shift outside of what you see in traditional industries.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question to that. We can skip to that one. So I want to talk more about that. Trends that would make the most impact to your business, both within cannabis and outside of it. This is open to everyone again. What are those trends that you're tracking? Absolutely, the cannabis industry is not just about the cultivation and the manufacturing and the eventual consumption of cannabis, but it has risen the tide for all these boats that are ancillary to the space, many of which we've heard about already today. And so what's the one trend in cannabis and one trend outside of it that you're tracking and would have the most impact to your business? We'll start with Evan and work our way back down. Or, never mind, Matt.
Well, I think one trend that we're looking at, Canada's obviously legalized last year, and the gradual rollout of retail there is a big trend that has been something that has been super unpredictable to date. It was going to, as an example, in Ontario, be rolled out by the government. That was rolled back. Now it's being privatized. And so keeping on top of those political trends, I think, is super important. A lot of the time, it's a highly regulated industry. So having the inner scoop on kind of what's going on with retail, what's going on with delivery, which is set to be released mid-May, keeping on top of just those sorts of things by having connections in government, I think is super, super important. Is something that we kind of monitor so that when those laws do come out, that we're kind of first to market. That's one thing I think is super important.
Definitely would agree with the politics side. All politics are local, and a change on council in a municipality that you hold a license in can drastically change the trajectory of your business or the regulations that you have to contend with. Outside of cannabis as well, just generally the dissolution of brick and mortar retail is paramount to the future of the cannabis industry. And within it, for us, we look at a lot of adoption of new consumers to what product type, what consumption method, and then what the conversion is once they're in the cannabis ecosystem. What do they move to from what they started at?
I think for us it's kind of twofold since we have a marijuana-centric business and a hemp-centric business. So the trends in the two are actually very different. For us, we're focused on cannabinoids and hemp right now. We see that actually moving more toward food-based and eventually fiber-based products in the U.S. On the medical side, for marijuana, it's much more about the research for us. What are the advancements? What can we build on? Efficacy-driven drugs and formulations. Not to discount the politics and regulatory, because I think they're paramount for either business. But I think in our case, research and advancement really has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, agree with all those across the board. Certainly, regulatory trends will shift this industry pretty quickly. Thinking through the domestic trends versus international trends, one thing that I think is interesting in talking through, retail and brick and mortar is experiential, and knowing that you have limitations in certain abilities to target consumers, get that trial that you may be able to do so in other industries is how can brands really get to market? How do they create or take some share of voice and understand how the consumer is going to interact, and creating unique experiences, I think, is one way that that's going to start to happen. And we're seeing some of those shifts in California. with the event licenses and some of the consumption licenses that are being issued now, and seeing what people can really think about how you bring that to life and what that experience looks like, especially when you have consumers across any age demographic thinking more about the experience they have, whether it's travel, whether it's a personal affinity towards a brand and how they feel based on that brand. So that's one big trend that I'm looking at.
Okay, awesome. So now, Jordan, John, I'm going to put you on the spot now. We're going to talk about cannabis research and cannabinoids. So, we held a medical workshop or tour yesterday. We had over 100 people, I heard, who was there. Dr. Sue Sisley, you helped out with that. Thank you so much. And so clearly, at least with this audience, that's more than 20% of the people that registered total for Arcview that were really interested in what the future for cannabis research holds. So I want to ask you, John and Jordan, what's the next cannabinoid out of the 113, right? That's in the cannabis plant. THC and CBD makes all the headlines now, but what's the next cannabinoid that's exciting for you? What's the one that we should all be paying attention to? Go ahead, John.
I think it depends on what you're looking for, indication-wise. The two that we're focused mostly on right now are CBN and CBG. So last year on the hemp side, we grew some strong CBG-oriented hemp. And for us, it's a stronger analgesic and anti-inflammatory than CBD is. It's harder to come by, not as prevalent in the strains, but it's very effective. CBN, people know, or some people don't, that it's very good for sleep and for insomnia. So those are two target products that we have in our portfolio today. CBC, some of the lesser knowns we're looking at now, but it's not a product that's going to come out in the next 2 quarters for us.
Makes sense. Jordan?
Caveat my answer with that I'm not in any way downplaying the absolute dire need for specific research around conditions and individual cannabinoids, but my 2 cents after seeing a lot of anecdotal evidence from people who are using therapies in very dire situations is it kind of always comes back full circle. For instance, and please, if anyone disagrees, I'd love to rant on this offline. A cancer patient who needs an antiemetic, there's few things better than smoking a joint. And I had to come through that process of discovery myself in administering to people who were going through chemotherapy or other tough treatments, and thinking, well, a refined vaporized extract is gonna be the best thing because it's the cleanest and the purest. And at the end of the day, generally it seems as though combustion of flower really has true medical efficacy. So to me, I kind of have stepped away from looking at the individual cannabinoids and look at really just the whole picture that is the magic of the plant as it exists naturally.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Absolutely, more funding needs to go into research, and that's what we're all here for, right? Is to bring out the value that this plant brings in whatever way, shape, or form. Great answers. Let's talk about the next big player, right? If you've been paying attention to the headlines, you know about big tobacco, big soda, big alcohol. We heard about big science today. Who do you think the next big player is that'll come into the cannabis space? Just open to everyone. Go ahead, man.
I mean, I've been hearing rumblings that there's like a big syndicate of Mondelez, British American Tobacco, PepsiCo, Andreessen Horowitz putting together $1 billion plus to legalize cannabis in America. And so I think that those brands are looking to get into it pretty heavily. And I think that many of them to date have taken a very wait and see approach. Obviously, we've seen a little bit of movement, but not the floodgates yet. But I think there's some writing on the wall. At least it depends on how you look at certain things. But the State of the Union yesterday even had, the first 2 topics, if I'm not mistaken, with the opioid crisis, and the second was mass imprisonment or something of that nature. And so I think that Trump is really setting the stage to legalize cannabis in America, from my perspective. And I think that as you start to see some of these trends on a regulation level start to roll out, that some of these companies will start to take the leap.
Okay, makes sense. Jordan?
I don't have any input.
Okay. John?
I think it's a cross between tobacco, the large soft drink manufacturers, and big pharma. And it's just be a question of what regulations change, what politics change first, but you'll see all three get involved.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add there. Large multinational conglomerates will certainly be the next of everything. They have the deep pockets, they have the distribution, they kind of know the market some things they don't necessarily know is how to bring this product and industry to market. It's very different. Other than that, I think we've seen a few get absolutely clobbered in their investment thesis up in Canada. So I think that will kind of quiet some of the approach that people take up there. Constellation specifically kind of put their toe in the water and then kind of jumped in head first and kind of seeing that hurt them a little bit here in the U.S. So, they're all going to be the next big things. And I think most importantly is, research and understanding where that is, because we can put out all the products in the world and we can tap into whatever we want to anecdotally, and certainly all those things are beneficial, but knowing really where we can affect societal change is important. And, some of the large conglomerates don't really think that way. They think more financially motivated. So hopefully we have some of the sort of better for you, good for you, conscious capitalism type approach to the space, and it probably will start from research and those that care about sustainability as well.
Absolutely. Excellent answers. Now I want to move on to challenges, and you sort of parlayed into this with your mention of the public markets. Companies going public is becoming a much more frequent occurrence. I know just in my conversations with companies who are trying to raise capital from this network, that it seems like it didn't used to be that the exit strategy was exiting or going public, right? But now that's become more and more the case, and in a lot of cases, I won't say most cases, but in a lot of cases, some of these companies want to go public as soon as right after their Series A. Do you agree or disagree with that approach? And and also as a sort of a follow-on to that, is there a right time or a wrong time to go public? We will start back down this way with you, Evan.
I mean, just with anything else, it really depends on the circumstances, and every business needs to think about the best possible outcome for themselves and what their intent is. Being a public company has a lot of pitfalls, and many people see that once they become public, and whether that is the cost of being a public company, the scrutiny of being a public company, they may not be equipped or able to, operate in that manner. But at the same time, it might be perfect for others depending on the strategy. And, irrespective of market dynamics, you have to think about your strategy, where you want to position yourself. And if that's after a Series A, you want to have the ability to go out with liquidity and paper to do acquisitions, then you can't really do that in the private markets. Is that necessarily the best approach? It really just depends. And so, for us, as we're helping to evaluate timing of different financings or exit opportunities, it's really an understanding of where the founders are they aligned with their investors, what are they trying to achieve, and is there a better strategy in a public format, or are they better remaining private and being more nimble and focusing on the growth and the fundamentals?
John?
I don't have too much to add to that, other than I think it's very situational on the company, but also on the market conditions. So it's a timing game, and really depends on if you're going after long-term EBITDA, or if you're going really after an exit strategy quicker, or want access to capital in open markets.
Sure. Jordan, anything to add?
Yeah, it's a trade-off. I'm personally agnostic to it. It depends on the strategy of your business, the timing of where you're at, and the ocean that is the market at large. What I am seeing a lot of, though, is that a lot of investors, particularly IBs, are only investing with some sort of very finite runway to a public listing, and I think that's dangerous for a lot of entrepreneurs because the industry is so early. And I think the metric that we like to all throw around, because it's so exciting, is this is the biggest industry in the last 50 years, second only to the internet. And then you think about the internet bubble, and it's a little scary. There is this huge amount of growth runway out in front of the cannabis business, but it's not what the internet was, and it's still ripe for normalization.
I've been born and raised in the Bay Area. I know what you mean. Matt?
Yeah, I think from an entrepreneur's mindset, a lot of this does come down to the founder oftentimes, and does that individual think that by going public that's going to help their long-term strategy? Are they even in it for the long term, or are they looking for a quick win? And lastly, can you afford to, if you are in it for the long term, to basically say adios to all product and all that related stuff, and just focus on being this figurehead on the public markets and managing that whole side of the business, which is beyond a full-time job. And so, this is stuff that we get asked all the time at Herb, and something that, for me, it's more about focusing on the product, focusing on the team, just doubling down there. There's tons of money in the private markets, and just kind of focus there for now. But again, it's like everyone's kind of said here, it's very situational.
And I think that also drives, to your point, the founder's kind of mentality, who they want to have as an investor. If you want to take on, VC money, that's a very different type of growth model than if you want to have someone that is a private investor that comes out of traditional industry that, is more comfortable with slow growth and more fundamentals. And so I think the strategy that the founder has to be aligned with the investor, which ultimately might, define what that exit strategy is and when they want that liquidity. And I agree, forcing an exit for someone that's not ready for it, it's unaligned, is very dangerous, and we're seeing that more often than not. And so, I think a little more, caution and focus on alignment is important.
Absolutely. All right. We have a couple more minutes here, so I'll have one more question for Jordan and John, and then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. I'm going to put you on the spot again. 280E sticks in the craw of many of an investor and an entrepreneur, particularly when they start out thinking they'll build this great cannabis business, and then they get hit with a tax bill at the end of the year that they weren't expecting. As two operators that are a little bit closer to the plant, what sort of strategies have you thought through about tackling with 280E? What are your strategies around that? Jordan?
Plenty differ from me, but we are overly conservative. You can't prepare for what they can throw at you. It's only just really begun at large across the industry to see what the IRS is going to do. And I think, we've already seen in Colorado a couple, and we'll continue to see businesses that die with the inability to pay their tax bill when they get hit with it. I think we're also, ironically, right around the corner from some level of reform. I think we're all probably positive and hopeful that the government's going to do the right thing here in the near term. But it's one of very few things that keep me awake at night.
So I married a tax attorney, actually.
So you're good then, you're good.
Good strategy.
But kidding aside, truthfully though, it helped design 280E optimization into our organization. So we have 5 entities that comprise our company. Research is a core focus in every one of those entities. And we do cost allocation is really the simple answer. Whether it's retail side, whether it's grow processing, we're very research focused, research oriented. R&D side, but also clinical to a lower scale, much of which our 280E optimization actually pays for the research. So it's really embedded in the design.
Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I mean, from an investor's perspective, certainly it's a key risk factor. But, if you think about that strategy, whether you're aggressive or conservative, a lot of the times when we advise our clients, it really is understanding exactly what you're trying to achieve and make sure that you have, a reasonable approach to how you're approaching your tax strategy. And if you want to be more aggressive, that's fine, recognizing that you may want to have a reserve for whatever that contingent liability may be. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourselves and kind of put yourself in a cash crunch. That makes it a lot easier for someone who likes distressed investing to come in and say, well, I don't mind your tax liability of $1.5 million, let's clean that up, but there are a lot of other issues, and then they have the leverage. So you want to think about that, I guess, on the operator side, but from an investor standpoint, it's actually a great opportunity to get someone cleaned up and get some great value for it.
All right, awesome. Well, with the few minutes that we have remaining, I just want to wrap up with final thoughts. This whole conversation was about trends in the space, be it fundraising or in public markets or just in your sectors in general. Any final thoughts you want to leave with the audience here?
I think cannabis is not all that different in many ways than just like regular business, and just like build something that's real, based off real fundamentals. Trends come and go, people come and go, investors come and go. Just build a real business, and everything should be okay. And focus on things like teams, surrounding yourself by good investors, and doing right by users, and generally are good recipes for success.
Yeah, I'll echo that. In anything that's high risk and nascent, you attract a lot of not real businesses and a lot of sharks or non-value add investors. And so, really being sure that when you're partnering with people or looking to make investments or build a business, that everyone that you align with shares the mission, vision, and values, because that's ultimately your North Star that's going to drive your direction, whether it's a public listing, a private financing, an expansion into a new market, your tax strategy. You really got to look at the people behind it all, especially while you have the opportunity to really look the decision makers eye to eye, because that is going away as this gets bigger and bigger. You're further and further removed from the people that are affecting what's occurring, and there's a lot of nastiness out there.
Yeah, and I guess I would say I kind of compare it to technology as a whole and how technology advanced over time. Cannabis is an industry in advancement and an evolution as well. So as much as there is pushing it and propelling it forward, there's powers to pushing it backward and against it. You look at the lobbyists of Big Pharma and some other areas where they may be against it today, and ultimately down the road they'll probably be the biggest proponents of it. And I think to that point, and I'm sorry, Jordan's point, it does attract people from all areas of life, and you really just want to push forward. I think stick with your guns and drive to your strategy.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. Matt made the point earlier of a lot of noise, a lot of hype, and that's certainly something to be cautious of and really focus on what you understand fundamentally, what you understand kind of from an instinctual perspective. That's probably going to win out in the long term, and make sure that you understand the alignment and the transparency that you have with someone that you're going to invest in or someone you're going to invest with as well. But I think this industry is not unlike anything else, other than that there's been this latent demand for products that people really don't know exactly what they can and can't do, but the opportunity is there, and I think it will be transformational for society.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time and attention, everyone. Evan, John, Jordan, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on market trends in the space. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Louis. Thank you.